So I realize this is probably a horrible way to start an ed talk, but I am a Midwesterner, so I have to come clean because I can't tell a lie and tell you that you were a little bit deceived when you signed up for tonight's event. Instead of the traditional ed talk, where you hear one moving story, I'm actually going to tell you 3 stories. The first story that I'm going to tell you is about our evolving nature of work here in our country. The second story that I'm going to tell you is about our human connectedness. And the third story is about the global challenges that we're facing that are here to stay. But don't worry, what you were promised will happen, and that is that you will leave with some insights about this main idea. Youth are entering a complex and interconnected world, and we, as educators in this moment, have the opportunity to rise to the occasion. My first story is about how we work. So while I now identify as a proud Minnesotan, and actually as a Minneapolis resident, what my dad would call a city slicker, my deepest and core identity is that of being an Iowa farm kid. The picture here is of my grandpa, Dick Ludwig. That picture was taken in 1945, and the picture on the other side was taken just a few years later, again of him. This is a picture that I took just a couple weeks ago when I was home visiting my family. This is my brother-in-law and my niece and nephew on the same land as our family was kicking off the planting season. What you see on the right side is, in that picture, is actually not an alien spacecraft. That is the inside of the planter. The planter is actually self-driving. It's guided by a giant computer connected to a satellite. It allows for my brother-in-law to plant the field in microplots where the seed is tailored to the soil type, the terrain, and the level of moisture. So while the world has always been changing, as my grandpa would probably say in the shift from a horse to a tractor, this is a particularly unique time for the level of change that we're experiencing. In 1945, the world saw human knowledge double every 25 years. Today, human knowledge is doubling every 12 hours. Just weeks after ChatGPT dropped, about a year and a half ago, we had the honor at my nonprofit, World Savvy, of hearing a message from Thomas Friedman, who's a New York Times journalist and author. And he said about artificial intelligence, AI will change everything about everything. According to the World Economic Forum, 85% of the jobs that our young people will hold in the future, 85% of the grade schoolers who are in classrooms today, these young people who will hold jobs in the future, will likely hold jobs that have not been invented yet, using technologies that haven't been invented yet. Therefore, it's not surprising that in a recent survey of Wall Street executives, 92% of those who responded said that they were more likely or as likely to want to hire individuals for the essential skills that they would bring into the job, what World Savvy defines in our organization as global competence. Summarize there. These are skills like problem solving, critical thinking, the ability to work with others, especially across lines of difference. And these essential skills, according to these Fortune 500 executives, are more important or equally important as technical skills or content knowledge. For those of you who are educators in the room, you might be thinking at this moment, ugh, and also, how do I do that in my classroom? How do I shift from centering content and skill mastery to centering these kinds of competencies? And the answer is not easy. In fact, that is what our entire nonprofit centers our work around. But it does mean that I have a few examples that I can share with you from having been in a lot of classrooms of educators that are trying to make this shift. So of course, the example that I'm going to choose to share with you here is an example from just down the road, an MPS school, a school called Ella Baker Global Studies and Humanities School, which is a pre-K through 8, and an amazing educator that I saw teach a science lesson to a group of 7th graders. And this educator is in her 3rd year of receiving coaching from World Savvy. As opposed to a perhaps typical science lesson where you would see students being handed a list of steps to follow and being told that that is doing an experiment, this educator started her lesson with asking a question. She asked her group of 7th graders, how do you know that there's water in the air? For the rest of the period, students worked in small groups that she had intentionally structured with intentional assigned roles to design an experiment to answer that question, and then conduct the experiment with their group. In doing so, she not only accomplished the goal of the lesson, of the standard, but also gave them a larger lesson, which is that learning isn't about arriving at a singular answer. Learning is about practicing curiosity and complex thinking. My second story is about who we are. According to the 2020 census, for those that responded, 1 in every 7 individuals to a question that was asked around racial identification responded some other race, underscoring the evolving and diverse nature of racial identification in our country. As it turns out, Iowa Mexican is included in that definition of some other race, as my 8-year-old son described himself and our bicultural family in his beginning of the school year About Me poster. To bring this a little closer to home, according to the Minnesota Reformer's Top 10 Megatrends list, which they introduce every year, diversification was one of those 10. Back to 1945 and my grandpa, in Minnesota at that time, 5% of our population were Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Fast forward 10 years, and my son, the year he graduates from high school, 50% of Minnesotans will be BIPOC. For me as an educator in my classroom, I actually always saw cultural and linguistic diversity as an asset. And the reason that I saw it as an asset was because I knew that ultimately what my job was about was preparing students to be adults, and that the skill of being able to work across lines of difference with others was going to serve them well, be that in community leadership or in their jobs. However, I would be lying to you, again, if I said that that was easy. It wasn't. It was very hard. Yet I would also argue that for us as educators, we will need to be increasingly skilled at relating to our students, understanding who they are, and building classrooms that center belonging across all of their diversity, now and in the future. My third story is about what we face. So I borrowed these pictures from an exceptional educator here in Minneapolis Public Schools that, unlike me, taught through the pandemic. And for any of you who taught during the pandemic or were taught during the pandemic, for some of our young people here, you do not need to be told the lessons that you learned and the reflections that you probably still hold. The pandemic is just one example of the community challenges that we face that are increasingly connected to global challenges. Things like, yes, global health, but also climate issues. Things like food security, war and conflict. These are issues that I might argue we, as this generation of adults, are not doing very well at solving. So therefore, we look to our young people and hope that they'll have better luck, that they'll be more successful in making inroads. But what will be the skills that they'll need in order to be more successful than we are? In order to be more successful than we are, as we look into our classrooms, we should be giving them constant practice with solving complex challenges with others and building solidarity with others in solving those challenges, practice with finding root cause, and also weighing multiple perspectives. So most of World Savvy's work is actually with adults. We help to support schools and districts that are trying to vision future-ready education and make the small shifts to get there in the classroom and in school environments. But we do have one program that we do that is directly with students, with communities that are trying to figure out how to activate these kinds of changes and have chosen to, as the starting point, understand youth perspectives and put that at the center. And we call this a Changemaker Hub. And I am just coming off of one, so these reflections are top of mind. We led a Changemaker Hub last week in a community just north of Detroit in Saginaw, Michigan, a pretty rural community that's experiencing a lot of the changes that I spoke to and trying to figure out where to go next. But again, it's starting with putting their young people's perspectives at the center of this evolution. And I was paired with a group of 10th graders from across different districts. And this is what one of the 10th graders had to say to me. My school talks about my grades and what score I get as the reason that I should care about school, but that really isn't that motivating. I want what I'm learning to reflect who I am, what I care about, and like the real world. And because our young people always say it best, and because I can't really top that, I'm going to go ahead and end. But as I do, I'm going to leave you with a question. And that is a question that all of us need to be reflecting on at this point in time. And that is, given everything that I've described, what should the future of our classrooms and our schools look like? And while I've sprinkled some breadcrumbs throughout my talk as to my point of view about that question, I'm going to go ahead and say it to you straight, because I'm not that Midwestern. In order to prepare young people for this future, we need to be centering essential skills or competencies in the classroom so that our young people are prepared to be competitive in this evolving workforce. We need to be understanding and seeking to relate to the identities and backgrounds of all of the students in our classroom, which might involve us making shifts. And thirdly, we need to make sure that the education that students are receiving, the daily lessons and units that students are receiving, feels relevant to them as young people. What this will require is for educators to shift from being the sage on the stage, which we love, and instead being the guide on the side. It will require for us as schools to practice stepping into a brave and vulnerable space of self-reflection in order to create the space for diverse and multiple perspectives. And it will mean that we need to rethink some lessons in order to look for how is the knowledge that we're teaching connected to an action that we want students to take with that knowledge. And if we can do all that, watch out, because we're giving our students the tools that they'll need in order to change the world. Thank you. You're up, Cole.
Well, hello, everybody. I'd like to start this presentation off with a question. So I'm going to call on a few people from the audience, but what's your job? How would you describe what you do in this field of education? Can I get any takers? Boom, right there. Okay. 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 All right. Teach students to love themselves. I like it. I like it. Anyone else? Anyone else? All right. There we go.
First, I'm a mom of 3 black boys. So
There we
that's
go.
just something important.
All right.
And then I work for Teach for America. So I recruit and place teachers and work in partnership with schools and students.
Okay. All right. Work in partnerships with schools and students. I'm liking it. One more.
Yeah, empowering young people.
Empowering young people. Okay. Cool. 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 Wrong. What if I told you that your fundamental job is to keep humanity going? All right? And not just, in our roles as mentors or teachers, but in this field of education, we are on the front lines for the fight for the future of humanity in its entirety. And in a system where predictability and conformity have become the goals of a system, I'm just going to hold this, have become the goals of a system, this is the domain of machines, predictability and conformity, robots, artificial intelligence. We heard the chat GPT, ooh, scary. Why are we teaching our children to be that way when we already have other things that can do those jobs, right? That's not what our future needs. And so I want to, for a moment, just talk a little bit about what I believe is sort of the fundamental and unique role of people, of humans. Honestly, we have a bit of a unique gift in this planet. We are able to use our abilities of self-awareness to put something in between the, cause and response, right? We have the ability to self-reflect and to act and to make choices, right, about the world around us. And those choices are what make up our whole future, all right? And so, self-awareness, imagination, consciousness, independent will, these are the things that we possess that arguably all other creatures on this planet possess to a much lower degree, if at all. Now, I'll give you an example here. Humans are the only species on this planet that could deflect an asteroid from hitting the Earth and causing another extinction event, right? That's pretty awesome. We're also the only other species on the planet that can destroy all of the Earth's natural resources, slowly converting it into toxic waste in this big global consumerist machine, right? So we, as humans, have a huge responsibility. And that power that we hold, we have a fork in the road. It could be either used for very, very, very good or very bad. And if we just ignore it, it will be bad. So, you guys are probably like, who is this kid telling me what my job is? Like, I know what my job is. What is he talking about? So that introduction that I had was pretty generous. It actually kind of ruined a lot of the surprise. So whatever, I guess you guys kind of know who I am already. But my name is Cole Stevens. I grew up right here, actually literally like 3 blocks down there with my mother, closer to Lake Street. I am the proud son of a black woman, and I'm biracial. My father was white as well. Grew up in Minneapolis Public Schools. And I also struggled a lot. I was too black to be white and too white to be black, right? So that was a struggle in my identity, right, that I had very early on. My mom worked all the time. My dad struggled with alcoholism. My parents divorced when I was 7. I have ADHD as well. School was really hard for me. It was really tough. I didn't do well in this traditional system. I was reprimanded for being, too hyper and talkative. It's really just social, like any kid. I was searching for belonging. I thought I was just social. Growing up in a really tough home environment and then basically not fitting into the model that school had predetermined that I should be good at, I fell behind pretty quickly in both, school and at home. My mother had more and more and more responsibilities with my autistic little brother. We never grew up with a lot of money. My dad was in inpatient treatment. I was growing up and going into high school, and I did what pretty much any young man with no father figure at the time would do, going into high school with no money, I started selling drugs. Okay, that's the options that you're given when you're put into that box. And I essentially looked for this belonging, sort of a counterfeit sense of belonging, outside of where I should have been getting it, at school and at home. I looked for that in the streets, right? And this lifestyle of doing and selling drugs caught up to me very quickly. By the age of 15, I was heavily addicted to hard drugs, and I wasn't showing up to school. By age 16, I was adjudicated and expelled from the Minneapolis Public School system. And by the age 17, I had to move schools, live with my dad, who just got out of treatment, was dirt broke, and I was helping him full-time in a job, while full-time at school, trying to pay the bills and get him out of debt. And then at 18, I lost my best friend to an opiate overdose as well. And so by all measures, from the day I was born, I was really set out to be another casualty of these cycles of miseducation, poverty, violence, addiction, right? These things that are all too often and all too, prevalent for young people. But a few things happened which completely changed that, and they happened outside of the school building. And a little bit later, I'll actually talk about how we can model these different things, that would have changed my trajectory, right, in the school system. So, real quickly, you did hear a little bit about me, though. Despite all those things, yes, I did help with a group of other young people, and actually my incredible mentor right there, John Bacall. We did actually change a Minnesota state law which got over $35 million out to high school students who had been working and going to school, paying their bills, primary or secondary breadwinners in their homes, many of them. And we did that all with Youth Voice. And all of that Youth Voice and all that energy that we had, we took it and we started an organization called Bridge Makers. And my big fat mouth raised enough money to hire more young people onto the team and build more programs, programs that have trained and affected hundreds of young people across the state, programs where we've also been able to research and hold conversations with thousands of young people across the state, and been able to share this inspiring vision with tens of thousands across the country. And so, yes, despite all those things, my big mouth has gotten me pretty far so far. Now, a little bit about sort of Bridge Makers is you can see here that our mission is, or our vision is a vision where all young people live in purpose, prosperity, and power, okay? And that mission is to cultivate these young leaders so that they can change youth-serving systems to embody that. You can see a few of the things here. I already talked about all that we do. So here's sort of my belief, all right? And it's that there's nothing more foundational that can be done to change the world than to raise strong and healthy young people, right? And actually, though it seems insurmountable, indigenous wisdom has made it clear how to do this for tens of thousands of years, since before we created the Common Core standards and all these other things, right? And this is evident. Number one, modern neuroscience supports this, and this is evident in something called the Circle of Courage, which is heavily featured in a book called Reclaiming Youth at Risk, which is co-authored by Steve Van Bakkeren, Larry Brentro, and Dr. Martin Brokenlake. So again, for thousands of years, humanity has progressed in this way, and in only very recent times have we gotten away from this. I'll show you right now what I mean. So this framework represents and identifies 4 foundational youth development needs. Every young person, every person needs these things in order to thrive and live their full potential in this life. So I'll show you real quickly. Everything starts with belonging. This little arrow here is very intentional because one must come before the other, right? So belonging, the feeling that you are loved and cared about by other people. Mastery, the ability to utilize, sharpen, and hone your skills as a person, which gives you the confidence to become independent, where you can take responsibility fully for your own actions and decisions and plans and goals, ultimately allowing you to have enough to give to others, which is the spirit of generosity or purpose. Don't we all want, ultimately, the young people that we serve to be able to utilize their gifts and bring them to the world in the form of their own, way of doing things and make that impact on, something bigger than themselves, right? Isn't that what we want? And so you see, where we fail is that this current education system hyper focuses on mastery alone. And not even mastery, just not failing, actually, is about as far as we've gone. And we don't even start with belonging. So I'll show you this. Dr. Martin Brokenlake, who I've had the absolute pleasure of meeting a couple of times, as well as the other co-authors, he says here, in this materialistic and fast-paced culture, look, y'all, I'm just going to grab this. In this materialistic and fast-paced culture, many children have broken circles. Okay, look back to that again. Mastery, we only focus on that. We're missing the other three. That is a broken circle. And many of these start with damaged relationships, right? The lack of belonging. And so family, school, youth organizations, us, right? We are challenged to create new tribes, right? In a sense, and new places of belonging, so that there will be no, as he names it, psychological orphans, like myself, many of the people who work at and whom we serve at Bridgemakers also were at some point in their childhood. And so, with all that being said, what can be done, right? In my story, I spoke a little bit about how I was searching for belonging as a young person and how I didn't find that at home or at school. I wanted a place to master skills, but instead of being able to use those skills to create things at school, I had to figure out how to do it in the streets and learn those skills like that. And that sense of independence I wanted so badly actually was a negative thing when I realized that at the age of 16, I had to go to my dad's house and help him out of debt, and I didn't have any other option but to do that. And I could not have a sense of generosity because I didn't have enough for myself even, right? And so all of the things you heard about Bridgemakers actually were the result of my circle being restored outside of the school building. And that was when I met John and my wonderful co-founder, Walter, who just got here. And we were able to have a sense of belonging with each other in that shared purpose of changing that law, right? Which was ultimately our sense of generosity. That was what we wanted to give back to the world. We were able to master and develop our skills with the help of mentors like John and others that really saw in our vision and gave us that space of belonging, right? And then we became independent, running our own meetings, knocking on legislators' doors, or Zoom calling them. This was 2020, okay? And ultimately, that spirit of generosity came in the form of some real checks, y'all, like some real checks hitting bank accounts for young people who had been working in that life-threatening time. And so how do we recreate that? How can we make our schools intentionally a place where young people's full potential can be reached the way mine was when my circle was restored? I've got some suggestions. Actually, first I wanted to say this. These values are so fundamental, they show up in a lot of places. I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with the Search Institute's relationships framework. Okay, look what you're seeing here. Express care, right? Sound familiar? Challenge growth and provide supports. Does that sound familiar? Share power, independence, expand possibilities, generosity. Same with Bridgemakers. I highlighted them in green because I wanted to see if anybody would remember. All right? See, same thing. These show up everywhere. And I would encourage everybody while they're doing their job now in the classroom or in your organization to start thinking about where circles are broken, right? Even in your team, where circles are broken. Where have we failed to create belonging before we go out and try to do all this work? And have we actually given our staff what they need to master the skill set, so on, right? So anyway, here's what we need to do, and I'll take this once more. We need to hold space in school for young people to connect with themselves and the adults in a way where they can communicate about things outside of the school building, things that are truly relevant to them, things that are pressing to them, things that upset them, inspire them. We need to actually meet young people where they're at, and we need to try to fit our system to their needs rather than the other way around, okay? And you do this with belonging and being in community and actually showing you care about that young person by not only holding a circle discussion when you're having a Socratic seminar. Next, mastery, teaching experientially. Anne talked about this masterfully. Experiential is the way we learn in real life. Two-dimensional is the way we learn in classrooms all too often, of listen to what I have to say and regurgitate it back to me on a piece of paper and just don't fail, right? I don't need you to master it, but just don't fail. We need to get into experiential, relevant, pressing things, real complex issues that are relevant to these young people in their communities. Independence, again, this is one of the hardest things I've seen, especially adults moving over, sharing power, right? But truly allowing young people the responsibility to guide their own curriculum and guide their own learning journeys and guide the classroom conversations, and also to fail like over and over and over and over again. And just because you're the adult who's figured it out after years of doing it does not mean that the right way is the way that it should be done every time. Because there is no learning in doing it the right way, the way that I know, right? And lastly, generosity. I believe that the only true, there's a few things, I shouldn't say only, but if it were up to me, the most fundamental standard in our education system would be, have you helped this young person develop a sense of purpose and a higher thing, something bigger than themselves, right? That's the driving force behind everything. What gets us up in the morning, what gives us the energy to serve our families, our country, our community, whatever it is. And that would be the foundation that I would set is, have we helped this young person develop their identity and sense of purpose and generosity? So, folks, these are just a few of the suggestions that I would make. However, this all starts with, once again, belonging, and it's going to take small steps to get to the big vision. So actually, Anne and I have some next steps with you. Anne, would you like to help me?
Thanks, Cole. So as Cole said, one of the quotes that both of our organizations stay grounded in is that for big change to happen, it starts with a series of small steps. So earlier this past year, Bridgemakers and World Savvy combined forces with another local nonprofit, Youth Prize, to set out to activate a few of these small steps. This project is called the Youth Reimagining Project, and it's a year-long partnership between our three organizations that is centered around bringing together diverse perspectives across the state of Minnesota. So geographically, generationally, politically, racially, in order to come up with a set of solutions for how education can work better for our young people. But we're doing so putting youth at the center of that conversation. So Cole will share a little bit more about some of the themes that we've heard in the work that's happened so far. But the work that has happened up to this point in the year has been a series of really incredible listening sessions that have happened all over the state. And what will happen next will be a day that is not unsimilar to the Changemaker Hub work that I described that World Savvy leads, where we'll be bringing together all of these themes in order to engage youth in designing some solutions. I'll pass off to Cole, but we'll leave you with, go back to your quote. A very wise friend, Cole, described our project in these words, that collaborative conversation leads to collaborative solutions, leads to lasting change. And that's really what each of us as individual leaders, our organizations, and then through this collaborative practice are trying to ignite.
So quickly, I want to talk a little bit about what these young people are saying. And some of these things are actually, you're probably like, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking while you were talking. But a sense of belonging in schools and communities and classrooms, right? Again, belonging, number one, like prerequisite. That is one of the biggest themes. As young people feel they are not truly cared about, respected, and that they belong in their school system. Developing relationships with caring adults is absolutely foundational to this, right? That is, in fact, the first step. Freedom and autonomy in what and how we learn, right? Relevancy and things that are based on young people's identity and passions and purpose. And then immersive and passion-aligned learning experiences. Again, experiential is the huge word here. We live in 3 dimensions. We can't be learning in 2 dimensions, right? We need to engage young people fully, the mind, body, senses, everything, to truly have a lasting impression and learning on that young person. So these are the things we're hearing. Join us for K2A Day. We're going to be at High School for the Recording Arts. And we will be there June 15th from 12 to 6. So come make some change with us, with the young people from all across the state of Minnesota. Our duty to them to keep humanity going and to prepare them. This is how we do it. Come join us. Thank you.
Thank you.